My name is Nicoletta Fossati. I am a consultant anaesthetist at St. George's Hospital in London and an honorary reader in clinical education and anaesthesia at St. George's Medical School. This means I split my working life between anaesthetizing and looking after patients having surgery, training new generations of anaesthetists, and overseeing the professionalism domain of the medical curriculum for St. George's undergraduates. In many ways, I've had a privileged start in life, but I have learned the hard way that no one is ever beyond experiencing difficulties and even discrimination. First, as a young girl and woman dreaming of becoming a doctor in provincial Italy in the 1960s and 70s, then as an international medical graduate taking on a consultant job in London, then again as a newly disabled doctor returning to work after life-threatening acute illness. I have learned that knowledge is a powerful tool for personal growth and that education is a route to freedom. I have also learned that I can help empower other people by transmitting them my love for knowledge and learning, and that learning should be a lifelong occupation. My story is about passion, a passion for learning that becomes a passion for teaching and gradually blurs the boundaries between the two. It is also a story about resilience, about the indomitable strength of the human spirit and the liberating power of knowledge and education. It is, above all, a story about love and kindness, given and received, without which none of what you're about to hear would have been possible. My upbringing: Italy, the 60s, the class of 1965, a bit provincial. Pisa, the town I grew up in, at its best, when all students are around for the academic year, probably 100,000 people. So that's the kind of size. Middle class, solid middle class. Money was never a problem. Sister, paternal grandparents, so 6 people in the household, quite busy household. Not many highs, not many lows, quiet. But that's where the little Nicoletta probably started thinking about her journey through life. I was desperate to learn and to go to school from the very beginning. I have some little scribbles and stuff, like all parents keep those things. I did for my children, and my parents did for me. So there's one they kept, and I was, I think, like between 3 or 4 years of age. I was desperate to learn to read and write. The first thing I did was to teach myself to read, in a way. There was this program on the telly, which was, ironically, for adult illiterates, which was called, the exact title in Italian would sound in English, It's Never Too Late. So it's ironic that a 3-4-year-old would just watch this program, because it just, just born to life almost. And that's how I learned to read. And my parents realized that, so how do you know? Because they would drive through and I would read, advertisements and things like that. So how do you know that? Nobody taught us. Oh, but there was this program on the telly and I watched it. So it was pretty clear to them too that I wanted to learn. And I bombarded them with requests to say, I want to go to school. And they tried to convince me that unfortunately it wasn't possible. I had to get a bit older. And in Italy, I don't know if things have changed since I left. I left Italy in 2004. But effectively, you really can't go to school, primary, until you are around 6 years old. It could be a month or 2, but you can't go to school like 1 year earlier like I eventually did. I was born in September, so clearly I would have had to wait for, being 6, but I couldn't wait. They tried to send me to nursery, which was a disaster, because the day I arrived, they sat us in these little desks and they gave us some paper and some crayons. I was like, okay, when are we going to learn to write, actually? And the nun, it was a typical religious institution. It's like, there's no chance, you're not going to learn to write, you have to go to school. And I felt a bit deceived. It's just like, oh, that's surprising. I thought I would learn to write here. So that's the story. But eventually, I managed to go to a private teacher, effectively. So I got private tuition for 1 year, from 5 to 6. And then when I got almost 6, I sat an exam so that I could get straight into year 2. And I remember the day. I was beaming. It was just like a dream come true. So I'm like, I'm starting that. I really felt like that was my start in life. I had all this drive and desire, and my parents were lovely, but it was Italy in the 60s, so the general expectations, especially for a girl, weren't really about going into, I'm not saying that they wouldn't want me to go into higher education, they were quite proud about that, but the idea was like, really medicine? I told them I wanted to go into medicine, and I put it in writing very early on, like 5 years of age. Again, just started this private tuition, and I put that in writing. I want to be, when I grow up, I will be a doctor, and I will get somewhere, I don't know, before everybody else. That's something along the lines what I wrote. But they were like, are you sure? Medicine is quite a demanding career, and what you're going to do, what's your husband going to think about that? Husband? I wasn't really thinking about getting married at the time. And when you get children, so how are you going to manage that? So all these kinds of thoughts were sown into my mind, and just like, this was this kind of dissonance, to say the least, and just like, I really want to be a doctor. I really want to study. I really want to learn. I really want to devote my life to knowledge, so to speak. And what's this thing about getting married and having children and doing it on my own? Usually there's another person you do that with. So all these things, I guess there was this tension, and I was always sort of slightly worried about this, because just like, yes, I want to pursue this with all my might. I want to be a doctor, I want to study, I want to go to school, but there was already this idea that there would be difficulties ahead. It wouldn't be plain sailing. It would all be very well for me to go to school and study and possibly go to university, but there were other expectations that I had to fulfill. So I never really thought about going to the UK. The UK was very much, the other side of the channel for me. I'm just like, not sure. It really wasn't on my landscape, but it became something relevant to me, again, years later, when I started practicing. Of course, I got out of uni, then I had to choose between specialty training and PhD. I went for both. I want both, but I had to choose, so I chose the PhD first. And after my PhD, I went into specialty training again. So it was a long journey, as it tends to be. But then pretty early on, again, I was lucky enough to get a post, as a substantive post, and I started practicing independently, as we would say. But then all these little worms started coming out of the woodwork. Again, you're a woman, you're young. At some point, I got married and I had a family. And so it was like, you can wait. Other people decide, but he's getting the post, but he's doing that. And I'm like, oh, there's time for you, you know, you're still young, you can do it later, we'll keep an eye on you. I was just like, oh, time's going by and nothing's happening. So at some point, I sort of call it, I decided that I was too dissatisfied. 2003, I contacted my friend, Gabriella, who at the time had come back from the United States, where she had been living for 10 years, got citizenship, her 2 daughters were born there, but she became Europe sick, so she got back to Europe, and she was living in Munich at the time. And as she had married a Tuscan guy, also at the same sort of excellence university, we're all alumni, she's like, look, I'm coming for my holidays in June. We talk in June 2003. And you know what? I'm going to bring down a brochure because the NHS, you know, the UK NHS, they are running, yet again, an international recruitment campaign. And she's like, I think this could be of interest to you. So we meet in June. I send this lovely cafe near the beach. And I still got the brochure to the day. And she handed it to me and said, just have a look. And that's how it started. I sent my CV and my logbook and everything that was required for the application. And big surprise to me, couple of days later, I received an email from the NHS International Recruitment saying, we've received your application. And that was astonishing for me because I was used to being ignored. I was used to receiving no attention. I was used to just having to insist for attention and being met with boredom. I was in a position where I was just like, you know how this works. You have to stay here and perhaps one day you will succeed. But I didn't like the idea. I'm like, I'm wasting my potential. So this thing that I sent something and 2 days later get an email reply saying, we're acknowledging your, so they're acknowledging it. So I exist. And they said, in 5 weeks' time, you should hear from us, you know, one way or another. And 5 weeks' time, almost to the day, they wrote back to me saying, yes, we've looked at your CV and your logbook, and it looks like it could be okay. So they invited me to 2 job fairs, one in Manchester, September 2003, one in London, October 2003. I got a locum at St. George's, December 2003, interview for consultant job on the 6th of January 2004. I got the post, and on Thursday, the 13th of May 2004, so around a year after, emailing my colleagues saying, I'm unhappy, I want to go somewhere else, possibly America. I was flying to London with my family, with all our stuff, in some kind of truck on its way to the UK. That's another milestone, if we want to call it that. So 2004, it's May. I fly to London with my family, and 1st of June 2004, my consultant post starts as a consultant anaesthetist at St. George's, where I still work. Need to settle down, me, my job, everybody else, in also all the rest. And 14 months later, 31st of July 2005, around 4 o'clock in the morning, I wake up in my bed, feeling very strange. I felt as if I wanted to change my position in the bed, but but I couldn't. Perhaps my husband was leaning on me. So I woke him up and I said, why can't I move? I said, switch the light on, and I'm like, I can't move. I couldn't move the whole of my right side from neck down. I could still speak like I'm speaking to you now, but I was completely paralyzed, plegic, as we say in medical jargon. So, the space of 5 minutes, just like call 999. Interestingly, they felt perhaps it wasn't as urgent, or because they wouldn't come to pick me up. So my husband was petrified, hung up and said, they're not coming. And then, obviously mastering my Italian way of doing things, I told him, call them again and tell them I'm deteriorating, which unfortunately I was doing anyway. So they did come and took me to hospital. I was in a deep coma at the time when I got there. I was in one of the deepest stages of coma, GCS 3-4. And what had happened, I had, completely unbeknown to me, I had an arteriovenous malformation, a bundle of extra vessels in my brain, which are not supposed to be there for good reason, because when they are there, at some point in life they rupture and cause a bleed, which is what had happened to me. And interestingly enough, I had sort of self-diagnosed that, although some of the signs and symptoms didn't add up. So it's like, it was almost dissociating, you know. The doctor in me is just analyzing the situation, considering differentials, and the scared self is just like, call an ambulance, because clearly there's something horribly wrong going on here. So yes, was some very harrowing time. When I was in a coma, certainly not for me, it was for my family. And they were told that it was very much touch and go. On day 5, I was operated on because essentially I was, again, risking my life by just staying there. I was deteriorating, so they're like, it's best if we operate. And then after like 12 days, so around total of 2 weeks, I woke up from the coma. And I woke up in a neurosurgery intensive care bed, again, unable to move, but able to speak. I can't remember this, but I was told that when they took the tube out through which I was breathing, my first words were in English, amazingly. And that was the beginning of an entirely different chapter of my life. When I first woke up, it was strange, because I'm like, I know only too well, because of my speciality, of course, that this is an intensive care, but why should I be in the intensive care? It's not clear to me. So I started thinking, and it was only after a couple of days, and I asked my husband, he was like, why I'm here? Because again, I couldn't move, and that should have told me something, but I was like, oh, maybe I had a road traffic accident, or I couldn't remember anything at the moment, you know, so what had happened to me. So it's like, maybe I had a traffic accident, so maybe I'm seriously ill. With the good hand, I would feel for my stomach, because perhaps they operated on my stomach, I don't know. And one of these early days, my husband was allowed to visit me. I was like, so what happened to me, Gianluca? Why am I here? And he was like, love, are you sure you can't remember waking up at home? And at that point, the penny dropped completely. It's like, you know, I sort of connected the before and after, and I realized, oh, now I see what happened. So there was that first moment of realization. But clearly at that time, the first feeling was of immense gratitude, because I was like, I'm alive. And I can't describe, I will never be able to describe the relief in my husband's eyes the first time we looked at each other and we spoke to each other for the first time after those harrowing days for him. So it was extreme gratefulness. It's just like, I'm alive. And interestingly enough, I felt like I was myself. I didn't feel any different. I still had my story intact in my head. What was uncertain to me was, of course, what I would do with the rest of my life, and what kind of problems. Of course, I was aware that there were a number of problems ahead of me. And it was probably only on day 3 of waking up from the coma that I had a very, very bad night, when all the weight, all the sense of how impossibly difficult it would be sort of landed on me like a ton of bricks. But then it was night. I had very poor sleep at the time. I guess it was a mixture of having neurosurgery, being given obviously all the sedatives and things they have to give you, and then the brain recovering. So I had very bad sleep. So I would spend many nights sleeping poorly or not sleeping at all, so a lot of time to think. And I was sort of contemplating the disaster that my life and my family's life had become at the time. But then I was like, look, it is what it is. And I've described the situation many times, every time I've been asked. I'm even been called brave or something like that. I'm not sure I was brave. It felt as if I was going through a tunnel and there had been a landslide behind me. So there was no other way other than forward, continuing to walk. And then hopefully at some point you'll start seeing the famous light at the end of the tunnel. There wasn't any other way. So it was like, okay, tough, very, but we'll have to deal with that. And so it was like, okay, one day at a time, 1 minute at a time, and we'll go through difficulties as they manifest themselves. That was the reality from the moment I woke up. And I have to say that people who know me, for better or for worse, they can confirm that I am quite a direct person, and I tell it how it is. Also to myself. I don't beat about the bush, and I'm like, this is the problem. Let's face it. I don't tend to sort of give a sweeter version of the reality. I'd rather say, this is what it is, and better face it, and see whether we can do anything about it. So that was my way to tackle my disability, and to say, Nicoletta, you're also a doctor. You had a brain hemorrhage. You've been operated on. They opened up your skull, and you're facing a long rehabilitation. You don't know what's going to happen. You know you are disabled now. You know you can't even change position in the hospital bed. I had to be turned by nurses. That was my state at the beginning. And there's no idea where you're going to land. So that was the main thing. So the acceptance of being disabled is something that I did almost automatically. I knew I was still myself in every possible respect. Like my husband was asked by my father, so what do you think? Is she herself? And she was like, oh yes, she is. It's like, not a doubt about it. But equally, I was like, we get molded by our experiences. So I was like, there's no way this experience is not going to change me somehow. So that's why I was like, this is a new journey, this is a new part of my life. And I guess, as many people tend to do after experiencing something I have experienced, and lucky enough, like I have been, to come back, they consider that day like a second birthday. It's the second part. So on the one hand, I was still myself in answer to your question, but on the other hand, I'm like, that life is no more. I'll have to figure it out on a completely different level, because this is a new Nicoletta, and I wouldn't possibly know how to do that. It was a long journey because there were a number of problems. My post at the hospital, financial issues, would we want to go back to Italy? Resounding no. And how to find our way, my way and our way as a family, back into some kind of normality. And that was peppered, for want of a better word, by the fact I mentioned before that you are rehabilitating. So you and your physiotherapists, neurorehabilitation doctors, everybody involved, every healthcare professional involved in the process of helping one individual getting back on track. On occupational therapists, there's scores of astonishing people working in the background. You know, nobody erects statues for those people. They should. But they were like one day at a time, because no one knows what you can achieve will be. We know, of course, what the region was where the hemorrhage happened, what was the area, so the vessels involved, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to give anyone a lesson in neuroanatomy and the vascular system of the brain. But it was clear what the worst bit could be in the end. The part that had taken the worst hit from the hemorrhage, so that wasn't a mystery. But obviously, the journey through rehabilitation, and I'm speaking as a patient, not as a doctor here, so not saying anything that should be taken for granted, but from my experience, around 90 to 95% of what I got back was over the first year. But essentially, again, I woke up and I was like a rag doll in a bed, having to be turned like a newborn, like a new life. Then gradually being able to sit up in a wheelchair, and I can't tell you how painful it is to sit out for 1 hour when your back muscles are not working. So I was screaming, said, "Get me back into bed." So even sitting up was a struggle. Then you have the wheelchair. So 5 months of wheelchair. Then at the end of the 5 months, you start being a bit more independent. Of course, during rehabilitation, you practice, you try, standing, walking, supported. Then a Zimmer frame, 2 sticks, tutor on my leg, ankle-foot orthosis, it's called, which is still there. I can't walk without. So it was a journey. It was a journey. It's just like, I don't know where I'm going to end. So it was a journey in terms of what I could do around the household. It was a journey around what I could possibly do at work, which was another big one. Being wheeled out to attend my children's birthday parties. I guess I was shown up as a trophy. I was in a state. I had very tufty hair because they had shaved my hair for the operation, leaving tufts of hair. I guess they're doing that in a good way, because they don't want to shave you completely, as in just shave as much as we can, for dignity, I guess. But I look very undignified. I would have very much preferred they had shaved me completely. At least I looked okay. I remember attending, there are pictures, attending these birthdays in a wheelchair, couldn't move my arm, tufty hair here and there, and must have looked like some kind of wreck. But I could see what my children wanted to show. They had got back to school, and obviously the situation was known around the school. They wanted to show that they still had a mum, a wreck of a mum, but they still had one. They were determined. I was like, do you really want me to come to your party? Yes. And I had to be put on display. I couldn't do much, but I think it was their way of saying, we still got a mum. She's still alive. All these journeys were sort of running in parallel. The journey back to work was difficult in that there wasn't a pathway at the time. I was very, very lucky that a number of, I call them enlightened people, sort of followed my folly, because I was still in rehabilitation, so I was still an inpatient, and the head of occupational health, St. George's Hospital, the then head of occupational health, she was about to retire, she was summoned to come and see me. And so I was there in a wheelchair with my arm still not working, and I was telling her, is there any way I can go back to work? And so to me it was like, is she gonna think I completely lost it? As in, has this woman sitting in a wheelchair completely lost touch with reality, with her current reality? She's thinking about getting back to work. And it wasn't lost on me completely, of course, but clearly it would have been a very difficult journey. So it was thanks to people like her and my then care group lead and a number of other people I found on my journey who believed that possibly I could do that. So we would have to be patient, we would have to see how things would go, because there was this awareness that neuro recovery would take its time. So there was a lot of, let's see what happens involved. And obviously, I needed people who believed that I would stand the course, because nobody tells you when you are in that situation, oh yes, we're certainly going to achieve that, this is certainly going to happen, and for good reason. So it was just really one day at a time, and then saying what was being achieved and what the next step would be. So yes, it was considering options. After 10 months since the bleed, I was allowed to go back to work in chronic pain, which pain management has always been part of the anaesthetic kind of specialism. And it was a more favorable setting for me, more clinic-like, GP-like. And it was obviously a good situation to be in. I had been tested, all sorts of cognitive abilities tested much earlier on in January of 2006, before allowing me to get there, to say, okay, your cognitive abilities are intact, so we can work on the physical. So again, I was walking in a very unstable fashion with 2 sticks and my trusty orthosis. But yeah, I'm seeing patients, speaking to patients, and trying to manage as best I could. And there was some months up to September that was very, very enlightened of my team. We have an advanced clinical simulator at St. George's, and one of my colleagues, who was heavily involved in a clinical simulation, offered me a self-assessment day at the simulator in September. It was a self-assessment, so it wasn't meant to rate me on my abilities. It was more about allowing me to discover in a setting very similar to the operating room, and where I would want to get back to, what my difficulties were, because no one really knew. And that was a bit scary, that particular day, because like many other times during the journey, I really felt under scrutiny. My colleague was absolutely lovely, and he stated many, many times it was my own assessment of my situation, typical simulation way. So you get a pre-brief, then you get into the scenario, and then you have a debrief and you reflect on the scenario, and then you move on to the following scenario. And that was extremely helpful. But as for every simulator, there's a double mirror room, there's the control room. And there were a number of people sitting there, from my care group lead, the head of occupational health, a number of other colleagues. And of course, I felt under scrutiny. Perhaps they weren't scrutinizing me, but I did feel like, I was almost sitting an exam. It's just like, tick, is she able to do that or not? So that feeling would recur many times along the way. So that was simulator. Then they decided that I could double up other colleagues in theta on top of my chronic pain clinic. Then I could be double up, as in be the main person. And then as of December 2006, I was allowed to go back to work part-time, but almost full-time. And then as of February 2007, it was back full-time. I've learned many things, and I continue to learn, of course. One of the most important things I have learned, come to realize, full on rather, is my inherent imperfection as a human being. I call myself a reformed perfectionist, and I suspect a lot of doctors and medical students are perfectionists or perfectionists in the making. And there's a stifling aspect to perfectionism, because if you want to do something only when all the planets are aligned, only when you're sure you're not going to fail, you're not going to make a mistake, well, effectively you stop living. And I've always been a perfectionist, and I remain, I have relapses. But the point is that this particular kind of disability, and I am aware that there are unseen disabilities which must be in some ways more difficult to carry because people can't see that. But I have a visible one. So there's no doubt that I have a problem, that I am imperfect, that I am disabled. So there's nothing to lose. So by almost embracing my inherent imperfection, it has made me more free to be myself. This is the most important thing I've learned from being disabled. I don't want to sound too sort of triumphant, but that gives me a strength, a shamelessness, perhaps my students could say. It's like, again, what have I to lose? This is my second opportunity, my second chance at life. I know I couldn't be here, so why should I not enjoy being back? Well, I hope I'm still learning. I like to think that I'm still learning. I think I'm still learning to try and be a better version of myself as a person, and that's a lifelong journey. I'm still learning to be able to forgive, which can be very difficult at times, but I think it's important to be able to forgive. Again, we're all imperfect creatures. And I think I'm still learning how to really enjoy life, enjoy love, all the love I was given, because there's a lot of love it requires to get a person back to the point I am now, and enjoy, relax, and transmit part of this joy to people around you. Not necessarily at the other part of the globe, but even if it's the square meter around you, that's a job good done. I'm doing that every day. But I'm not good at that, so I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to do that, how not to be grumpy, how to stay positive. There is, of course, the odd bad day when I'm just like a bit disgruntled. So I'm still learning. Resilience, as we know, is the ability to bounce back from negative events. That's the definition. There's an element of not giving up, never say die. There are a number of fantastic figure of speech in this lovely language to show that. It's just like saying, no, I'm not, it's not over till it's over. I won't consider myself beaten, until it's visible, until it's clear that I can't do it. So there's a little bit of this kind of attitude of saying, okay, you think I can't do it, and I'm going to do it, just, to your face. There's a little bit of this, but there's, again, this idea that there's so much untapped potential in every human being. What I discovered was a resilience that I never knew I had. Had I been told, in a fictional situation, beforehand, look, when you turn 40 years of age, this is going to happen to you, and so on and so forth, I am absolutely sure what I would have thought in the kind of fictional scenario. Well, should that come to pass, that would be very much the end of it. The end of my career, the end of my dream of practicing medicine in the UK, and not much more else to do. But that wasn't what I experienced when it came to pass. It was just like, we'll see what I can do. And I've used this analogy in conversations that have happened in the past. It's like getting a ticket back to a theatre show. Your seat is a little bit restricted view. You have to perk on your seat a little bit like that if you want to see that part of the scene. If you want to see the actor, you have to do a little bit like that. But would you say that you don't want to go to the show? I'm going to say. So it's that kind of thing. But again, what struck me was the fact that it was there for me to tap into. What was required? I wasn't wishing it on myself. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. It was there. So that's where I started thinking, resilience is almost built in. And it is for us as human beings to tap into it when the situation requires it, and obviously finding people around us who create a conducive environment. But I think resilience is there, and that's how I understand, although I'm not an expert in that, I understand that resilience to a degree can be taught. So you can give pointers to people as to what works to tap into that resilience and what doesn't. So don't go down that route. If you want to tap into your resilience, don't go down that route. Well, in the particular situation of waking up disabled and having a very long rehabilitation journey ahead of myself, First of all, it really kept me sane. When I was in neurorehabilitation as an inpatient for 3 months, I asked my family to bring medicine books down. I was desperate to read something complex, I was obviously secretly trying to test my cognitive abilities, I guess, but also just like, I was, after those months in hospital, it was just mind-numbing. And the situation is not particularly conducive to using your brain, if I may say so. It's just like, at times I wonder what our patients do. It's just like having your, change of dressing done, this and that, and then eating, bodily functions, sleeping, repeat. And I'm like, so there's more to this, you know. So books in my room, piles of books, leafing through these books. And I guess that was a lot to do with occupational therapy too, on many respects. My physiotherapists asked me to prepare a PowerPoint presentation around anesthesia because they didn't seem to know much. So they say, let's tell us about anesthesia. What is anesthesia? And that was very good because it was a physical task, using my arm, using the computer, standing at the computer, and then having to test my balance, which was another problem. My balance is still challenged to this day. So it was very good, but also it was something that brought me to life. I was teaching about anesthesia, for goodness sake. So it was great. And this thing about teaching someone else education, I had always taught, because I was always intent on an academic career. So obviously with the PhD, then you start giving lectures and all that. And medicine is always about other doctors teaching new generations of doctors. But then this aspect of knowledge and saying, look, knowledge is not necessarily boring. Knowledge can be fantastic. And it's liberating. It can lead you to freedom, independence, independent thinking, critical thinking, saying things for yourself. It's just like, I'll be the judge of it, you know. But obviously, you need some knowledge, which is not information. Information is different. Information is not knowledge. That's another thing I try to explain to my students at times. So I feel there's a strong link between the passion for learning, my education, educating myself, educating other people, having to relearn and continuing to learn, and trying to transmit this love for knowledge to other people and its potential, especially when it comes to hard times. And finding in knowledge, new knowledge, I had to relearn a lot of stuff. Again, how to do it differently. And incidentally, my speciality keeps changing all the time. I'm relearning a couple of tricks of the trade these days. So, you know, it's never ending. And it certainly makes me feel alive. So first of all, I should say, doctor, heed your own advice. So again, I should learn from myself and my experience first of all, and I don't aim to give any lectures to my colleagues, because by and large I've been treated, I know I've received world-class treatment from the healthcare system, from the NHS here, and scores of lovely colleagues and healthcare professionals of all types or specialisms contributing to the success, you could say, certainly from a healthcare point of view. I think since this happened, a lot of learning has happened already. The learning has been and should be, continue to be, about enabling the person, because the person is the one who knows about their problems. They are the ones who know best. Patients know best about their problem. They're not necessarily medically trained, but they know about their problems. So listen, always listen. Sir William Osler used to say, listen to your patient, they're giving you the diagnosis. So we should heed our own advice as a category. It's about saying we are human beings and there are so many facets to our personalities. It's not just about clinical work. So it's about really getting back to that part of the person that can also translate into more efficient clinical work, have a holistic view of this person. So yes, she's a disabled doctor, but that doesn't mean that she can't go back to work. So the majority of people just, welcome me back with open arms. But some people were like a bit, really, do we have to have this person around? Can she work with us? Of course, there are things I can't do anymore, but I think I can still do a pretty good job, unless, at some point I'm not able anymore, and hope, I'll be able to understand what happens, and obviously somebody will be assessing me at the time. We get constantly appraised. So a little bit more listening attitude, perhaps, a little bit more thinking outside the box, which was exactly what the people who helped me did. My care group lead, there was a person at the deanery also who found this project to allow me to go back to paid work, which was very important for me. As the main breadwinner at the time, was very, very important. So in chronic pain, was through the deanery. So all these aspects, every so often there was this idea of saying, wouldn't you rather retire, or just, not really, no, let's see whether we can do that. So I would just say, let's try to see a bit more possibilities rather than problems. Of course, one thing you were asking me about what I learned, I have learned even more to be honest with myself. You've got to be honest. You can't pretend you're able to do things you can't do anymore. Just simple as that. But some things are not necessary. I remember one of my consultant colleagues, more senior, much more senior than I was at the time, he was in chronic pain. And we were discussing, and just like, I said, well, what do you think? Do you think I can go back to anesthesia? He was like, I've never seen anyone having to run around an operating table to be an anaesthetist. I don't think it's necessary. So, it's that kind of attitude, the listening attitude, the seeing possibilities. It's something that I would recommend. And again, I am living proof that I have met people with that kind of enlightened approach. I would like to leave you with 3 questions to think about. What defines you as a person? What, if stripped from you, would make you cease to be you? What or who would give you resilience if, at some point, all seem to be truly lost? What do you want to be your living legacy?
Thank you for watching this Meaningful Conversations episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to see more videos in this series, then please like and subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you can get notified of new videos as they're posted. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.